Because the thing is, I think anarchism is a really interesting concept, but I think that if you're taking anarchism and then you're appending something onto it, and the thing you're appending onto it is fundamentally hierarchical, like, well, what the fuck is that? That's not. I mean, what what are you trying to do?
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. So, like, when it comes to anarcho-communism, the book I had read was The Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a famous one. If you know about what's called BreadTube,
Yeah.
YouTubers like ContraPoints and others, they're big into this book, even though a lot of them don't like it. So I don't know how it became such a meme, because if you ask any of them, they don't like the term. They most of them haven't read it, which is funny to me, or they go out of their way not to read it. It's only like 100 pages. It's not a big book. So I got that, and I also got Anarchism and Other Essays by Emma Goldman. And I also read some Max Stirner. I was recommended him. He's also an anarchist. So, like, in short, anarcho-communism, the way it's defined by Kropotkin, he would say that, you know, the both are synonymous, because you're a communist. They would say that, you know, the blue sky ideal of communism is to live in what is essentially a communist, governmentless, stateless society. That's their idea. And so the funny thing is, when you think of anarchism, pretty much every single ideology we have right now only exists because of liberalism. Liberalism going back to, you know, the 18th century or whatever. Because the concept of the importance of the individual and their role in society has birthed everything from that. And that birthed anarchism, that birthed capitalism, that, and then the reactions to that would be communism and fascism, that are trying to de-atomize the individual in various ways, and they have different ways of doing it. But really, like, the patient zero for all these various conflicting ideologies came out of the Enlightenment, like the concept of liberalism, and they openly talk about this. What I find interesting, though, is we talked about the book Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe, who would be more on the maybe ANCAP libertarian side of things. But they all, what I find is, no matter who you are, if you're a libertarian or an anarchist or a fascist or whatever, everyone has conflicting accounts of how the world used to be.
Yes.
Prior to the Enlightenment. So some people say it was absolutely awful. Some people say, and like the Marxists would say, that the entirety of human history is just a class struggle between capital owners and whatnot. And then, you know, the fascists might say that, well, but also it was awesome because the hierarchies were different. And then, like, everyone is using human history as leverage for their thing in different ways. And I don't think anyone really has a truly clear account, because obviously the further back in time you go, the less accounts there are. So you have this, like, idea of a peasant, you know, and how you feel about that, how that peasant's life was, will define what your politics are right now. Because that's the rhetorical unit you have. I just found that kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So I can talk about anarchism. I started with Emma Goldman, who was, you know, a certain type of woman. And some people would say that, you know, there's a lot of anarchist literature out there. So I just picked 3 to give an overview. And I don't think there's a lot of conflict in people saying, like, these are foundational works, they are referenced. Max Stirner is very interesting, because reading about his, he's an egoist. So he takes, you know, the concept of the sovereignty of the individual to almost an objectivist length. And if you read his stuff, he's like, the same people who would criticize Ayn Rand and libertarianism and objectivism will still say, oh, Max Stirner had some ideas. But his whole thing was like, I am the most important thing in the world. I should only ever have to act in my self-interest no matter what, and I'm not answerable to anyone. And that's it. That's what I'm going to do, which within the framework of anarchism makes sense, because they are against all frameworks. The only thing that matters to anarchists is the individual. And they're very big on the non-aggression principle. They're very big on no hierarchies, no systems. There's no concept of personal property. So he takes that to the extreme. It's
immediately violate the non-aggression principle if you believe that you could do anything against anyone else so long as you cared to, because you're the only thing.
I know.
It's almost solipsis, you know, like a solipsistic. What do you call that? Where nobody else matters, nobody else exists except you.
Yeah. Oh, and that's what I would say to the point of libertarians, where even with Hans Hermann Hoppe, he was saying, to get back to the community level, to smash the state and start all over again, there still exists this idea of an organic hierarchy. There still is this understanding that, okay, look, if you want to build a fucking bridge, you need to have the guy, what's like, to come to this conclusion, all you need to do, like what you do, is employ people. You know that you cannot have an anarchist workshop where everyone just organically and chaotically comes together and decides magically to make project. You need a leader. You need a guy cracking the whip. You need a guy organizing people. And their idea is that things will just happen.
There's a key thing, and we talked. I hate that we talked about this before. But in business, right? There's two ways of looking at it. You can look at it as a hierarchy, and definitely a lot of people do. Certainly, the corporatocratic way of doing things is that you have this enormous hierarchy, and the people on the top are essentially feudal lords. But in a real business, in a functional, productive business, I think the correct way of looking at it is not as a hierarchy, but as a team of people, and each person on the team has a role. And each person on the team makes sacrifices, and each person on the team takes a share of the product. And maybe one person on the team, their role is to dump a bunch of money into the pot and walk away. And another person on the team, their job is to organize the money into shares. And another person on the team is the person who goes and digs the hole, right? That now you probably immediately look at those three people and you put them on a kind of a hierarchy, but that hierarchy is just in your fucking head. You did that. They didn't do that, right? And there's no reason those people can't be friends and neighbors. And there's no reason those people should be paid differently necessarily, right?
And
So
it's easy to see how complicated projects could break down. So let's say you have 5 people and each have a role. Then one person says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And then you have to say, okay, well, I guess one person has to do 2 jobs and they don't want to. So then it just doesn't get done. So it's more about practicality.
Yeah, but the thing is, when the person, this is the thing though, if you have 5 people doing a job and one person says, I don't like this anymore, I want to leave. Well, let's say they leave. Fine. Well, that person's pay is split amongst the other 4. And if one of the other 4 actually winds up doing the entire other guy's job and not just 1/4 of it, then he ought to get double pay. And that's probably what they would negotiate, because again, this is voluntary. I think voluntary is the key phrase, and it's frustrating that this isn't brought up more in anarchist literature when arguing or dealing with anarchists, is the idea that there's such a thing as like you said, there's such a thing as a natural or organic hierarchy, but a better way of describing that is a voluntary hierarchy, the hierarchy that people agree to and the hierarchy that people love. Like, you could argue, and people make this argument now, that there's a hierarchy between husband and wife. I would say husband and wife is a partnership, and one takes one role and another takes another role. The roles are different. They're not equal, but I don't know how you describe that, but they're not equal, right? But that doesn't mean it's a necessarily hierarchy.
And that's why anarchists also attack the concept of marriage. So, like, for your business is a great example, because I think you're doing yourself a disservice, because I think if you weren't there wouldn't be a business. These people wouldn't just, without you there and your leadership and your guidance. And I know you don't look at them like you're subordinates. You don't look at them as if you're at the top of hierarchy. That's why you are a good boss and a good leader. However, if you just went away one day, they wouldn't. And you've told stories where it's like, unless I tell them to do something, they stand around.
Right.
And they need that, and it's voluntary. However, that entire structure would be something that anarchists are largely against, which, especially according to Emma Goldman, this is why they attack things like marriage. Any framework that is not completely lateral is seen as exploitative. So they are trying to fight exploitation. So the very concept of having a leader, period, it cannot exist within an anarchist system, because they believe even if you have a leader, that is some kind of manipulation and exploitation. And there's also no concept of ownership. The concept, because at least with libertarianism, within the framework you're talking about, there will still exist the concept of private property, even beyond a monetary thing. Like the idea of, this is my family, this is my son, this is my house. And even in a communist society like the Soviet Union, as much as a big game they like to talk about, we're all kind of equal, people still had their apartments. This is my apartment. You can't come into my apartment and just hang out.
It's almost a natural laws thing. Yeah.
But they're against that. They're against that. Like, if you have a tool and you have a hammer and you're using this to do some work, and some other guy comes and takes your hammer, within this system, and they've used this as an example. Kropotkin said this: you shouldn't be mad because maybe that guy needed it more. Well, now I don't have a hammer. Well, we'll find a way to make a new hammer. It's a lot of we'll figure it out later, because their true belief. And when I read this book a long time ago called Capitalism and Freedom, or Capitalism and Power, by Milton Friedman. It's one of the foundational works of free market capitalism. And it's a lot of the same stuff. It's a lot of the free market and everything, and zero borders. It'll solve all problems. And it's like, well, what about monopolies? Oh, why would there? It's a lot of why would that ever happen? Because people are fundamentally good. If you read the book, just like in anarchism, it's like, well, what about when there's bad people? Well, there's no bad people. So this fear of yours wouldn't even happen. Like, why would a business ever, like in Milton Friedman's mind, the concept of Amazon is impossible. You know what I mean? Like the concept of someone trying to be greedy.
Actually, I haven't
You know
read
what I
that,
mean?
but I don't agree. I actually disagree. But it's kind of an unrelated topic. But
But a lot of the whole point is like a lot of the things they say. It's like, okay, well, why wouldn't this work? Well, it would, because people are they're awesome, and this bad thing
yeah,
wouldn't happen. It would
but I
just
think
solve itself.
I think I
And
think
when it
it's still
doesn't,
a dodge. Like you could even agree with him on that, but it wouldn't make any difference because it's still fundamentally immoral, right? I mean, just working from the first principles of self ownership. If you have self ownership, nobody else can make a claim over your life and property, right? I mean, there's a
yeah,
whole other thesis there, but like I don't know that idea. I mean, the old joke is the toothbrush, right? Like, what do you have? Do you own your toothbrush? Do you own the shirt on your back? If someone else is cold, can he take it from you? I mean, at that point, there's obviously core arguments that you can make against it. But the first argument I think the average person would make, and at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? The first argument the average person would make would be an argument with their fucking left hook.
yeah.
So why,
Well, and
why
this
does
is
it?
what this is why a lot of the anarchists and the communists they come up against, because when the communist revolutionaries within almost every successful guerrilla warfare area, they were dealing with a lot of agrarian populations. So one of the pieces of propaganda, or one of the just things they said was, you know what, you deserve the value of your labor for tilling the field. You know, because if it's an exploitative, maybe feudalist system they have set up, it's like you, the worker, deserve to own the field that you work. And then they would say yes, because, and just like the whole thing with anarchists and landlords, it's like you live in this place, it's yours. You shouldn't have this exploitative landlord above you. And a lot of people would say, yeah, but then anarchists and communists would take it to its extreme. It's like, okay, but also this isn't yours either.
Yeah,
This is part you killed your landlord, and now this is yours, but this is also everyone's.
I mean,
And so this is something where
yeah,
communists always stall out. It's like you can till the field. You killed the feudal lord, and now it's yours, but it's also everyone's. And also you don't get to have your tools either.
that's not anarchism though. I don't think that's an anarchist position, and I don't think this is what I'm trying to say. Kropotkin is not an anarchist. Kropotkin is a communist. Kropotkin was a crackpot who thought that he could create something and name it anarcho-communism, but it's not. It's just communism. It's not anarchism. Because, like I said,
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah.
anarchism stems, and anarchism doesn't have to be right wing. Anarchism is often very left wing, but it can't incorporate communism. It can't incorporate communal ownership because the nature of anarchism is closer to Stirner. It's closer to self ownership. It's on the basis of self ownership. So if you can't hold someone as a slave, how can you tell a person that if they labor in a field for 7 days, the work that they've done and everything that they own can be taken without any argument by the
Yeah.
community?
And I give that example because that's literally what is said. And when I say, like, Emma Goldman, she makes the case that the family, there should be no such thing as marriage. There should be no such thing as a mother. She believes in this thing called not just free love, but free parenting. This is where a lot of, like, the white anarchists are so big into living in, like, free love polycule relationships where everyone's dating everyone and everyone raises the same kid, and that kid doesn't even have really a biological mother. It just has people. That's what they want to do. So every single system needs to be broken down. And they say this, and they say that's what Kropotkin kind of gets at, because the one thing that I found interesting about the Conquest of Bread was he spends a lot of time going over why every communist revolution failed. That was one of the central things of the book. He's like, we've had many communist revolutions. We had the Paris Commune. and that fell apart. Why? And he's one of the few guys I've read that like took a step back and say, okay, why does this shit keep falling apart? Why doesn't this work? And so his idea was that the concept of communism wasn't anarchist enough. That was the entire idea of Concept of Bread. Really, if you had to have one headline, was that these revolutions, these communes, eventually fail because people don't have enough food. That's exactly what happened in the Chop, the Chaz places. They tried to farm, and the Conquest of Bread is like, as long as you can provide people food, bread to survive, you can do other stuff. But if you can't, at the very, very beginning of your revolution, make sure everyone, as they're destroying the system, that everyone is fed, then it's gonna fall apart. Because every single time a commune's breaking down, it's because people are starving and they just go away. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's why in with Kropotkin, and you'll see this in a lot of this is a very, very influential book, because this is why expropriation is so important to them. He says this is why many anarchists will like destroy things, destroy the banks. And his angle is like, no, we need to take as much as we can. We need to occupy the spaces and take all the food to survive. So it's not so much like burning a store, it's taking over a store. You know what I mean? And that's why these autonomous zones exist, because, and that's the reason they're not trying to actually attack the government. They would rather just make a zone where they can just eat and drink and do whatever the fuck they want, because they at least know that unless we can assure that people have a roof over their head, this isn't going to last. And it doesn't last for many other reasons, because at its very core, it's a dumb, insane thing.
Yeah, I know you're probably, it's maybe not, this isn't like an exploration of what they were talking about, but at a glance, anything that, like Chaz, using Chaz as an example, or most of these communes that wind up the same way, like you're going to expropriate, right? You're going to expropriate something that somebody else worked for, some other individual. It's not the fucking state, it's your neighbor, right? So you just oppressed them. You just created a power hierarchy where you're over them. You took what they had, and then you lose it because you essentially burn it all, and not in a fire, but you burn it in your stomach, and you have no way of creating more. Like you're a destructive animal. I can't even comprehend how anybody would think this is a cogent political theory.
And obviously, and the most obvious thing always happens, where we're going to have this whole free area. It turns out that the garden doesn't get planted, and the biggest guy with the most guns immediately takes over. And you're sitting there in the corner saying, you know what? It's, give him some space. He's going to come around, because let me get into some of the points. And these are quotes from the book that really, this is foundational across all anarchist thought. And it's funny because, and I've tested this. I've actually been in anarchist chats. I got kicked from one. I don't know why. I think actually because I liked some of the people, because that was one of the few places where I could just tell dumb jokes. And they would still, they had kind of like a racist bent to them. They could tell, a lot of the way we call the dirtbag left and bread tube, it's a lot of, bunch of gay communists who like saying the word retard. So that's where we can kind of get along. But yeah, I got kicked from there. It was full. One of the people I was talking to, I think I pissed them off, was, let me think, it was a gay trans furry communist.
Great.
Classic. So all those things. And I'm just like, I didn't think you really existed. I thought you were just like right-wing propaganda. But and then this creature, I think it's fair to call a furry a creature, a trans furry. You're an animal, according to you. Yeah. You're an animal. And then they talking about getting estrogen pills. I'm like, you're a fucking wreck. You're absolutely right. But anyway, so I would test these ideas, and this is what they've told me. So a lot of the reason I'm reading this is because I've been in anarchist groups, and this is what they say. Amusingly, though, a lot of them will say that reading books is nerdy and gay. So a lot of them will cite these ideas, but they've never actually read them. And again, these aren't long books. There's not a lot to anarchist thought, really. I don't think you're going to find like a Spengler and a Vola version of anarchism where it's like a 900-page opus or something.
The real original core span of Western anarchism is like 1850 to 1930, and it's mostly fucking pamphleteers. It's not authors.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of fucking farmers and woodsmen and prostitutes. So it's not that that's a criticism necessarily, but it's not like you have it's not War and Peace. You don't really have an excuse to not read the fucking literature.
Here's another funny thing. I was talking to some people, and they were there was in Kensington Market, there used to be an anarchist cafe. I think it was called Who's Emma? And there's like a Wikipedia entry on it, and I came to the realization, like, every time I've seen an anarchist business, because they do exist, the bookstores and the cafes, every anarchist business model takes the form of you hanging out with your friends. Like, I've never heard of an anarchist factory, but it's always like an anarchist cafe, an anarchist bar, an anarchist bookstore with a cafe and a bar in it.
Yeah.
But it's like every time you try and start a business to show that this can work, it's like, oh yeah, we brought in a couch and we just hang out and we just smoke cigarettes all
Well, I
day.
think
Like,
that's just left anarchism though, because there's right
but that's
anarchism.
because you can't do anything else, because that would be like, I'm providing things, but you can't get them to work on a project, because that would involve you creating some kind of even a vague hierarchy, which they will immediately try and destroy. I don't even think anyone paid for things. They just borrowed money or something. But so here's some notes about anarchism. We've had a bit of a preamble here, but so the individual and society have been at war with each other since forever. And here's something interesting, especially with Emma Goldman, but there's this theme in her book that people are stupid. And when I talk to libertarians and a lot of the other parties, they do believe people are fundamentally good and intelligent. And I might disagree with that, but there is this theme running through the book that the mass they're idiots. They're idiots that we need to save. You know what I mean? They talk down to people more than you think an anarchist would. So there's nothing but contempt for anyone who's not an anarchist, which is amusing to me. The mass is stupid, but glorifies the individual as being tricked into ignorance. And all majority opinions should be attacked and disregarded. And this is what she says, and what a lot of anarchists say: if anything is popular, it must be attacked. And so you might say, like, anarchists are like against certain things. It's like, there's no rhyme or reason. It's like, no, if anything is popular, they need to destroy it, even if they don't know why.
Well, it's a tangent, but there's I believe that too, and there's good reasons for believing that. There's some provable, objective reasons. But anyways, that's interesting that she points that out.
Yeah, and the idea, and also that laziness only exists within privilege. The idea that a regular, like a poor person, can be lazy is impossible. And they say this: the only lazy people are rich people, and if you're poor, you're not lazy. You can't be. So there's this idea of her being like she's like a rich person and everything. So like she glorifies the impoverished. And that's a common theme you'll see with an anarchist. A lot of them are trust fund kids. A lot of them are academics, and the whole joke, like, they love black people because they've never met a black person, and they'll still cross the street if they see one. But they have this, and this was common when we talked about the book Days of Rage, with a lot of the anarchist and communist groups. Like, they lionized black people. A lot of these white and Jewish people thought black people were like the most honest and true and amazing people ever. Like, it never occurred to them that there's such a thing as a shitty black person, because ideologically they can never think that. Ideologically, there can never be such a thing as a bad poor person. Which I think once you realize that, a lot of what they believe starts to make sense. And all crime is misdirected energy. And the only reason crime exists is because people aren't able to do what they want to do. And she says this. So, like, the concept of rape in an anarchist society, there would just be no rape or theft or anything, because
she doesn't believe in rape.
Well, they just say, like, all crime is misdirected energy. So the only reason crime exists is because we live in a system, right? And if you got rid of all the rules, it stands to reason there would be no rape, because the only reason like people rape is because they're upset and they're poor and they don't have maximum freedom. Like, again, the concept of like a black guy or a white guy or anyone who just like wants to stab someone because they like to stab, that's impossible. No human being would ever want to do that. That's only a reflection of capitalism or something. I know it's weird.
I think it's a sideways way of her proving her original point, which is people are stupid. But in this case, it's just her being stupid.
But you actually ran into this in the Soviet Union, because one of the things the Soviet Union said was, we are so within this system, there is no crime. And then when there was crime, they would cover it up. Like, I think there's a movie that came out with
China's the same. China does
yeah,
that right
there's a movie I wanted to see. It's about like this. It's set in the Soviet Union. They're trying to find a serial killer, but they can never admit that a serial killer would exist within this system. So they have to like cover it up
now.
from the public and hide it while also trying to find the guy. But because that the existence of just a rapist, a Jack the Ripper type,
Yeah.
is in. You cannot admit that would ever happen in the system. So
And
it's
I
like,
also want to say, because I don't know whether people, we know this has never come up, but if you're in Shenzhen, if you're in just outside the core in Shenzhen, you want to talk about just the degree of flagrant, slinging of drugs and prostitution on the street. It's fucking rampant, man, in China, in urban China, and nobody talks
yeah,
about this. It's like China is all clean and orderly, and they're good at math, and they have great biotech companies. Dude, they're a bunch of fucking fentanyl heads. They're a bunch of fucking crackheads.
yeah,
There's such an incredible drug and prostitution epidemic in China. It's shocking to most people who have never seen it. But again, it
yeah.
never gets reported on. And then they'll go through intermittently when the government or the president's passing through, and they'll clean it all up, because it's the no true Scotsman, like, well, they're not really Chinese, they're not really good communists if they were doing that, so we're going to brush them under the rug.
There's stories about that happening rampant in North Korea as well. Like,
Yeah.
once you
Oh
leave
yeah.
the shitty but somehow manicured brutalist
Yeah, well,
architecture
which
capital and
was
go
it?
to the
Was it meth
villages.
in North Korea? I thought it was meth or something like that. That they were cooking. They were cooking like in the barracks, and like
Yeah,
everybody would just like trade cigarettes and meth, and like everybody was on
yeah.
fucking meth. Like it's insane.
Which to our listeners sounds cooler than it actually is. I know
Yeah,
it sounds like it'd be really fun to live in a village and just trade meth for
yeah, yeah.
cigarettes every day, but once you do it, it's a real grass is greener situation.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
just on the topic of crime, because they go into crime a lot, Emma Goldman goes into it a lot. Anarchists are obsessed with the idea that laws create more crime, and she says that the police, the existence of police, creates more crime. Now there might be a philosophical, like,
Yeah,
it's
she's
almost
on
like
to something.
if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound, sort of thing. Like, yes, yet police put more people in prisons because they enforce laws, right? So like, but of course the existence of laws would make crime, but she's saying it in a way where, like, if you see a cop on the street, that makes you want to do more crime, and I'm not sure that that tracks.
I
You know what I
think,
mean? Like,
and I think that she's stupid, but I'll take her at face value. If, again, back to this concept of, like, you could call it common law or you could call it natural law. If you reduce the police in one direction and say, like, it's Singapore and it's a crime to spit on the street, well, now you have people who are in jail because they spat on the street. Well, that's not a moral crime, and it's not a crime by most people's standards, but apparently now you're a criminal. So that's a case of the police creating criminals. On the other end, if you had no police at all, then every time somebody was murdered or raped, that crime. I mean, are you telling me that if there were no police, there'd never be another murder? Like, of course not.
that's
You'd
what
have.
she's saying. That's what she's saying.
That's fucking, well, this is what I. That's why I'm saying she's a fucking idiot. But the real issue is determined, because the point is, those two things are two different things, and there is a line. You do cross a line at some point where, this is the police creating crime. But that being said, there is such a thing as a natural crime, and we do need to defend against those things. And there is a fundamental purpose for security.
And that's why when anarchists say, like, empty out the prisons, abolish the police, this is why, like, they're latching on to the Black Lives Matter thing as a convenient sort of thing, and using black people and their constant grievances as a thing to surf. But really, they really believe that if you didn't have prisons and didn't have police, crime wouldn't exist. People would just become cool, and that's what they're trying to get at. And
It's crazy.
another thing about crime, which is interesting, um, there's a lot of hypocrisies within the book. I'm not like a hypocrisy obsessed guy, but there is within the same page, she'll say something like, under capitalism, more and more women are forced into prostitution than ever before, and that's fucking terrible. And then, like, a paragraph later, she'll defend prostitution as like a empowered working class
Yeah,
thing.
because Emma Goldman was a prostitute. So I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
and the funny, and this is something you'll notice with anarchists, like, they will. It's an ideology of convenience. They're not long term thinkers. they will use something as an argument for or against something within the same conversation. They're just trying to strike out in whatever they think a weak point is, but they don't. Their ideology is so simple that they don't really care. There's no self contradiction in them, so they're hard people to talk to because really all they believe is if we lived in if everyone's cool, the only reason that things suck is because of systems. And here's another thing that I noticed when they keep talking, and this might be an issue with when these books were written, because a lot of it, the metaphors and the allegories they use are with factories and agriculture and peasantry and things like that. But it seems that like the only society that can exist in an anarchist world is subsistence farming. Like the idea of making more than you need is almost, that's bad. That's almost like you're making capital, you're making extra. It's like if you just do whatever you want, everything's going to work out. But it's like, but you,
Yeah, but that's not anarchist though. That's communist again. That's Marxism again. The whole idea of creating capital is immoral.
The idea is like within everything they describe, like you can never have a complex system. So within an anarchist society, which is free from all sorts of systems and exploitation, you can only ever rise as high as being a farmer and having maybe a house and maybe not even a wife, because you don't even really have a family. But it's like anything more complicated than that is almost by definition exploitative, right? And that's why if you ask anarchists and a lot of communists, you'll see this on Twitter every now and again. It's like, well, okay, let's say the revolution happens. What do you want your dream job to be? Without fail, it's always like, I want to become a traveling poet. I want to teach children about anarchist theory. I want to make cupcakes. Like it's always just dumb bullshit. Like it's never, I want to make the world a better place. It's like, I want to do this thing that a fucking university student would think is cool. And every so often someone will be like, yeah, I want to get high every day and just hang out. Like you'll see that. And it's like, okay, so like what you're doing now, you just want to live in a society. You're doing exactly what you're doing now because all you motherfuckers are writing shitty poetry and, fucking your friends. You're just like, yeah, I'll just do that if there's no more money and I don't need to worry about money. But it's like, there's never going to be, you're going to be like being in an Amish society would be way above them. That would be such a fucking get for them. So imagine an Amish society where everyone's starving and pissed off.
The Amish are actually closer to a true anarchist society than liberal, quote unquote, anarcho-communists who are essentially cafe communists. They're not even really anarchists. But these fucking people, like the Amish, live in a society with a hierarchy, but it's a very limited hierarchy. They eschew government, they eschew taxation, and they are subsistence farmers who share amongst themselves within their family and community. Yeah, the democracy of the beard, exactly. So I mean, look, I think that, I don't want to be fucking Amish. That was kind of a joke, but I think that they're closer to what some of these guys would have actually dreamed of, and to the extent that the modern class of people who subscribe to this ideology really are a bunch of fucking potheads. It's dead. It's like Latin, and I'm glad it's dead.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would like to be an Amish, but I do have the mental wherewithal to know that at some point they would sneak into my bedroom at night with knives and get rid of me because I would be the worst Amish person. Like I know where this is headed.
Well, your beard would not be red. That's the problem.
Yeah. The democracy of the beard. I don't know. That's funny to me. That's why women can't vote. But also, when it comes to political violence, she makes a point here of like justifying political violence. And I think this speaks to them psychologically and how they view the world. So to justify political violence, they must imagine the pain of everyone in society. So when you see an anarchist, you could be a black guy who was arrested for literally shooting at cops and being involved in a domestic dispute. Like maybe this guy beat up his wife. Maybe this guy beat up his children. The anarchist will look at that and say, wow, this guy looks like a piece of shit. However, I must imagine the pain he's in that would cause him to do this. They will go out of their way to justify all crime, no matter how many people this guy has victimized, because like the only reason he did that was because he's in pain and he was lashing out. And I must imagine that pain and internalize it. So it's this grand fiction they do. So this is how they interface with the world.
Is this still Goldman?
Yeah. I haven't gone to Kropotkin yet.
I need to read this. This is crazy. This is like, honestly, this is blowing my mind that there's literature, because I've met people that think that way, and I thought the only way you could think that way is, first of all, incredibly low IQ, and then maybe you were damaged or abused as a child. Like, how could you look at a fucking serial rapist and blame the person trying to stop the serial rapist on shooting the serial rapist? It's like fucking, what is it, the what is the disorder where a captive falls in love with their captor?
Fuck, what is I know exactly what you're talking about.
Stockholm
syndrome. Stockholm syndrome, yeah.
Stockholm syndrome. Yeah, it's Stockholm syndrome. Like, this fucker is running around. Like, I mean, look, it's topical, but George Floyd is the best example of this, and I can't even understand it. Like, look, I don't care whether Chauvin killed him. Let's say for the sake of argument, Chauvin put a bullet in the back of his head. Who cares? Who fucking cares? He was a rapist. He was a serial abuser. He was a drug addict. He was a fucking he was a piece of shit by every fucking metric. George Floyd was the biggest piece of shit. Why? But that's what it is, right? They're looking at him. They're like, oh, can you imagine the pain and suffering that poor Georgie went through to arrive at that position, to become such a fucking stain on human society? He must have gone through so much pain.
It's so funny. It's because it's like, well, what do you say about drug cartels? Because most of these drug cartels operate in areas where there is no government. There is actually no. They're in charge. They're in the fucking jungle, and their brutality is widely known. So what? Because like, you can be an anarchist will look at a guy who's raped 9 kids to death, and they will say, you know, the only reason he did that is because he turned on the TV and saw a judge. That's what they'll think. Yeah. They'll actually think like, yo, that's the only explanation.
Well, and why can't you do it the other way around? If you had a corrupt cop who killed a bunch of hookers, could you defend the cop using the same argument? Why not? Wouldn't that be consistent? If you like, why couldn't you defend an American president conscripting 1,000 troops and sending them to die in a Southeast Asian jungle? Could you defend that? Why not? Maybe he had a fight with his wife this morning.
One of the famous lines of anarchists is "Be gay, do crimes," and I used to think that was just kind of a meme. But then I read this, I'm like, no, that's it. That's their declaration of independence: is be gay, do crimes.
It should be gay, do crimes, get shot dead, heal society. That should be actually how it works.
The funny thing I noticed is that anarchists also love playing the victim, because she will detail, and so will Kropotkin and others. People used to hate anarchists, and still do, because they actually do assassinate people. They do kill people. They do conduct terrorism. But Emma Goldman and others will deny up and down that that's ever happened. And every single time you've heard of an anarchist trying to do harm to someone, that was actually a conspiracy by the police and the government. And then she will immediately turn around and say, the most important thing we can do is blow things up and kill people. That's the only way to do it. So I'm like, do you think, like, I know that she thinks I'm stupid and she thinks she's the smartest person in the world, but that's a very dumb argument.
And at the very beginning of her documentation here, she said everybody is stupid and you can't trust them to, like, it's so fucking obvious. I don't know.
Yeah, and like, I had this line, and this is what really struck me about anarchism. It's like, and leftists in general, they have a short circuit in their minds when you describe the desire to want to live in a framework or a system or a society where you aren't treated like a celebrity. That's why they always say, you're not voting in your self-interest. Why wouldn't you want to take all your landlord's money? Because they can't comprehend a person not wanting to live in a system where they're not treated like God, and not just God, but a child God, because they want to be unaccountable children. And there's a thing, and this is me maybe just kind of being a little suspicious about some things, but in this book and others, there is this glorification of children. and they will describe these anarchist terrorists who succeeded almost having like a childlike whimsy, or they were innocent like a
Amazing.
child. And I'm not trying to say there's a pedophilic thing here, but there is this assumption of children being pure, and the more like a child that you behave as, the more pure you are. Because all this stuff about systems and politics and stuff, that's all boring. But to be like a child is to be pure. And so their heroes will be described in almost childlike terms. And I think that's something I'd like for people to think about for a second. Again, I'm not saying that there is a pedophilic thing here. However, these very same people will lobby very hard against the age of consent. And who is that? There's like a Rousseau. Rousseau is a famous philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Is that him? No, I think it was someone else.
Yeah.
But there was this other guy No, it wasn't Rousseau.
Talk about Jacques Cousteau.
No, Rousseau.
Like
So basically,
kids and
they're like, he got dinged recently because word came out that he had a sex, and he was kind of this anarchist thinker. He was a philosopher, and I don't know if he was like a big time anarchist, but I think he might have been more like a materialist sort of guy. But anyway, he got dinged for like people said, oh yeah, when he was living in Tunisia, he was having sex with children. And I'm like, whoa, that sounds like a big controversy. Then you look it up, and this guy, along with many other French philosophers, lobbied the French government to abolish the age of consent. So it's like the most obvious thing in the world happened. Yeah. it's like, oh my God, you got caught for child. Yeah, the guy who tried to legalize child sex openly also molested children. But like these types of people, they don't, and you can see why anarchism would attract so many sexual deviants, drug addicts, and really at the foundation, antisocial personalities. So whenever you get Antifa get caught, it's like, remember like Rittenhouse shot like two of them, and both were like sex abusers. It's like, yeah, this type of thing is very attractive to pedophiles and arsonists and fucked up weirdos.
I keep coming back to this, and I want to get this thought out. We talked before about the idea that if you're in a militia, or if you're in some kind of group or organization that is in some way extreme, right? If you've got an axe to grind as a group, you have to watch out for, after a certain period of time, people with maybe they got a low IQ, or maybe they're damaged in some way, they're going to come in, and they have their own motivations, and they don't really understand what they're doing here. They don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. You have principles, and you have reasoning, and you've read the literature, and you get loonies. And then the loonies drag you down. And in some sense, I think at some point, the loonies are the ones that wind up grabbing media attention. The loonies are the ones that are going to wind up blowing you up from the inside unintentionally, just because they're fucking retards, right? I maintain that people like Kropotkin and Goldman are that for the anarchist movement, because there were anarchists before them, like Thoreau and Spooner. And Goldman was a literal 2-bit prostitute 3 generations after the anarchist movement had already started, and for whatever reason, and I know the reasons, but people will read her, and it's insane. I didn't realize that she was that far gone. I've heard Kropotkin thrown around as well. I mean, he seems like he's literally just a fucking communist. But with her, I mean, she sounds like if you're gonna go behind a fucking gas station on the highway in Pennsylvania and just talk to a fucking crack whore. That's what she sounds like. Nobody should tell me that I can't do drugs and fuck kids. You can't. I'm gonna kill the president.
And
that's her.
But that's also Max Stirner, because like you'll see quotes from him where like he's against private property, as many anarchists are. However, the reason he is because it interferes with his ownership of the world. It's not that he fundamentally believes. Yeah,
they're psychopaths. So you got to, at some point you have to say, either this is the philosophy of psychopaths and retards, or because of the positioning of the philosophy, it has attracted a lot of psychopaths and retards, and it's done a very poor job of kicking them all out. And that's what I think. Because I know, because I'm fond of actual anarchy, but this is not saying nobody owns anything but me. I'm God. That's not anarchy.
But that's what's so funny about, like, this is why I like Emma Goldman, because she makes points in a way that I've seen Antifa do. Like the dumb shit she says, I think has wider cash with a wider, like the Antifa and the modern people. Like, and what I notice is it's so self-contradictory, because I'll give you an example. So, and in one page, she will say at the same time, patriotism as a concept is bad because it's expensive. Patriotism costs a lot of money. It's dumb. But then moments later, we'll say money is bad and shouldn't exist, and it only causes suffering and violence, which causes suffering and violence. However, suffering and violence is good. You see what I'm saying? And she'll say the military sucks because it turns soldiers into sexual deviants, right? And then moments later we'll say but sexual deviation is essential to the cause. You see what I'm saying? So you should love the army, right?
She's a regular David Icke, is what she is.
And these are within paragraphs, so it's she's just trying to poke holes. It's you do know that being in the army makes you gay. You should be gay over here. With me, what the?
Okay, so
yeah.
So actually, the army is great. We actually support the army as anarchists, but only because it makes you gay.
Yeah,
that's fucking amazing.
And I'm not joking. This is what happens. This is a common enough theme in a lot of the anarchists I've read. I haven't read everything, but I don't think most anarchists have read everything either. I guess that's the point I'm getting at. Most anarchists don't really read this. They'll get together and talk theory, and I've seen how they talk theory. The way they talk theory is saying we should eat the rich. That's all they say. There's really no moral. Of course, there can be no moral. They think morals are bad. They think morals make you a slave.
Yeah. The left anarchist practice is just left anarchist practice is trading tips on how to store knives under your shoe, or how to make Molotov cocktails, or how to fucking how to steal from the Nike shop without getting caught. That's their practice.
Just to discuss Kropotkin a bit, we talked about this briefly about, this is where his communist stuff comes in, because Kropotkin will say, and this is where the anarchism comes into that, the problem isn't that certain people create and hoard surplus capital. The problem is the very concept of a surplus is the problem. You see what I'm saying? So it's not that, there, what I mean? The entire concept of having too much and saving anything is bad in itself. So it's not even wealth redistribution. It's you need to structure society so no one is even considering the idea of having more than anyone else. So it's lateral. It's a completely lateral system.
We should exterminate squirrels and bears and bees and all other creatures on Earth that understand the concept of time preference, that know that surplus is necessary for the survival of advanced organisms. I mean, just on its face, the concept of surplus being immoral is one of the dumbest things I have ever heard.
Yeah, and like I said, every ideology, he points to medieval towns, because he said this in the book Conquest of Bread, that communism is actually the natural state of mankind, and he will gesture broadly to a medieval village. They didn't have money back then. They had a concept of working together. I'm but they still had the concept of private ownership, and that's what they really come up with.
Sorry, but did he believe that medieval villages didn't have money? Did he believe that?
That's pretty. He's saying that anarcho-communism is the natural state of mankind, and because people might get together and build a bridge, but he's so we're going back to how it naturally was. But then he also say you shouldn't have private property. I'm no, all these people had concepts of value and private property and all kinds of fucking systems that. But again, they will gesture to these things and hope you don't notice this.
That's what you're saying at the beginning, that they're going to use their understanding of history as a cudgel, and like you said, hope that you don't notice, hope that you're willing to hand wave their understanding of history, their belief that the entire Dark Ages was a communist utopia where there was no money and everyone lived in communes. There was no conflict over property in the Dark Ages. What are you talking about? It wasn't. It definitely wasn't 900 years of the darkest period of conflict over property.
Yeah. And also, if you need to summarize what Kropotkin believes, it's this sentence. It's not so much the right to work or the right to what labor produces. And this is where he differs from communists, because the communists would say you deserve to own what you produce and you shouldn't have, lords and capitalists and whatnot. But what Kropotkin says is the only right anyone has, is the right to well-being and well-being for all. So that's what it is. So it's like the only thing we need to care about society is that as long as everyone is taken care of and fed and happy, and then there's no ownership, so no one has anything over anyone else. So that's why he goes further than communists by saying, like, we're not even giving a shit about labor, because that's a real Marxist sticking point. It's about labor and making things fair, and the concept of capital. He's like, fuck all that. It's made up. Who gives a shit? As long as you're happy, we're going to do whatever. And it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. And so that's the core of what anarchists truly believe, I think. And this guy, it's funny because if you look at the history of Kropotkin, like he was an aristocratic, like he came from an aristocratic family. He was like a landowner. He was a rich guy. He's a rich guy who wrote theory. So again, he's this man, and this is a common thread you'll see with a lot of anarchists. They're so separate from the street level, from where the rubber hits the road with people. So this is a guy who will look upon his plantation and see his fucking servants doing shit, and is like, those people are so cool. And they're nice to him. He's rich and influential, so all the poor people are really nice to him. So he says, wow, these poor people, they're nicer than my friends, my rich friends. Like, no, yeah, because you have power over them, and they're being nice to you because they want a fucking tip. Like, this is the guy, like, Kropotkin goes to a fucking restaurant, and Kropotkin is the motherfucker who thinks the
waitress likes him.
Yeah, he thinks the stripper's falling in love with him, this fucking faggot. And like, he'll say things like, we are more wealthy and doing well, but then throughout history our society is so good, so why are we still sad? So I always had this comment, and I think this underlines a lot of what anarchists believe. It's like, we are gods, why don't we feel like gods? I think beneath everything there's that belief, like, I'm smart, I'm awesome, why don't I feel that way? It must be the system rigged against me, that I'm not the child god that I think every human being should be. I think that's, and this is mainly from the Conquest of Bread is what I'm talking about right now. And I have to get going soon, actually, but that's, I covered a lot of Kropotkin at the start. Really what he covers, like, the concept was what I just described, and also the concept of bread, the concept of expropriating land and making sure people are fed and happy, because it's actually a practical book. That's what I liked about it. It was like, why these things keep failing. And I think you'll see a lot of the groundwork for what Antifa is now. Even if they don't read the theory, there are people who are calling the shots, and they're using this model more than other anarchists, because anarchists of the past would just be shooting politicians and blowing up stores. I'm seeing an evolved form of anarchism that's closer to this. So a lot of which is actually less about morals and less about the philosophy. It's more something designed by antisocial maniacs.
Yeah.
Let me just see here. And he keeps going about, like, it's a lot of like, oh, if we just do this, everything, like, if you provide food for everyone, it'll destroy global trade. And also the biggest thing is the concept of luxury. This is talked about by Emma Goldman and a lot of others, and Kropotkin, about like, well, what if you're living in a commune and someone just wants a fur coat? What if someone wants like a gold watch? Like, the desire for luxury, and all he says is, no one's going to want that. So I'm not joking. That's all he says.
Biggest fucking hand wave.
Yeah, it's like, no, wait,
that's
and it's a lot like, it'll just work out, because really at its core, and they say this in the book, that you can't make any predictions about human nature because real human nature has never been seen. And Marxists believe this too. Like, this is why the real Marxism has never been tried, because it's such a new idea. Everything you know about human nature has existed within this capitalistic system. So you don't even know how people really are. We think we do. People are actually really cool and awesome. And within an anarchist system, no one's going to even want a gold watch. That's not something no one is going to want a faster car. That's just the desire just won't exist. And I'm not joking. That's what he says. And then that's the end of it.
I think it would be fun one day, once we become billionaire exploitative tycoons, to use some of our money, not for philanthropy per se, but to create a true communist commune, and to just dump them all in it and just watch them all starve and videotape it, like live stream.
We've got it.
We could make a killing.
It's called Africa too. Like, we know.
Oh, that's true. There's Africa. There's Venezuela. We actually have a lot of examples. I think really we just need to install cameras.
It would only to destroy America. is a huge thing. You could move to a lot of these countries that are already almost anarchist according to you, and that could be your utopia, but you don't because it doesn't look like Portland, right? And also, here's the thing that you're going to love. He blames all workplace deaths on working conditions in a capitalist system. And then he raised the question, well, what about workplace safety in our new world? And he says, oh, there won't be any workplace deaths. They won't be, because why would there be? So like if you're working in a mine and it's really hot, like, you know, in this system, someone would figure out a way to pipe cool air in and bring people water. Like I'm not joking when he said there will be no such thing as workplace deaths or anything bad or accidents in this system, because it's only natural that if something's dangerous, people would figure out a new way. No one's ever going to fall off a ladder in an anarchist society, because we would just make a new type of thing that's impossible to fall off of.
That's so insulting, as if to say, and this is what I don't understand fundamentally, but the number of people that might be reading this. You have a real job. You exist within a capitalist system. You've been at work and had an accident. This man, Kropotkin, is blaming you. He's saying that it's your own stupidity, and that if you lived in a perfect system, this wouldn't be. I don't know. It's just so fucking insulting. It's unbelievable. I hated Kropotkin to begin with, but
I'm quoting this book, by the way, people. Like, this is not me like reading between the lines. He has said it's like, oh, it just won't happen. It's because why would people fall? Why would people just not like what the? I'm reading it twice. I'm like, is that it? Because the chapters aren't very long. It's not a long book. It's like 100 pages, and a lot of it's like question and answer. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? And just like Capitalism and Freedom by Friedman, it's like, nah, that won't happen. Why would it? Why would it? And you've never seen a real human being before, so your idea of humanity is broken.
I want to go back through Friedman sometime. I got to read that, and then we should go through that and maybe some of this other stuff, because I think I don't think it's fair to compare Friedman and Kropotkin. Friedman, I don't really agree with all of Friedman's stuff, but I think that Friedman did a lot of good for human society.
I do think there's more research and effort put into something like free market capitalism than this. Like no matter who, if you're listening, you don't like capitalism, sure. Hey, look, we've covered a lot. You have to, the takeaway, the headline here is that this is the dumbest shit I've ever seen in my life. And I went into this with an open mind. I didn't go into this like when we read Capital by Marx, did a whole arc about Marxist thinking, and I found some stuff there that I found very interesting that I liked, and I can tell there's some I can see why this is popular. I can see why people would like Marxism. I might not agree with it, but I get, when you listen to a band, I don't like this band, but I get why someone would like this music. Anarchism, like it's irredeemably stupid, and it's lazy, and it's for psychos. And we're going to get into some stuff later, but I'm like, there's really not much here. And I'm actually stunned it's as popular as it is. I mean, I shouldn't be, considering I just think it's a loose umbrella to have the dregs of society, but it's very, very dumb. And I really tried to give it a chance. I read a whole bunch. Anyway, I got to get going now. All right, man, I'll talk to you later.
Take it easy. Have a good week.
All right, bye.